The IKEA Business Network is now open for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Join for free today to get access to interior design services to help you make the most of your workspace, employee well-being benefits to help you and your people grow, and amazing discounts on travel, insurance, and IKEA purchases, deliveries, and more. Take your small business to the next level when you sign up for the IKEA Business Network for free today by searching IKEA Business Network.
Hello, and welcome to Money Talks. It's a special extra episode of Slate Money where we chat with brilliant and interesting people. I'm Emily Peck. I write the markets newsletter at Axios, and I'm co-host of Slate Money. And I'm here today with Samhita Mukhopadhyay, the former executive editor of Teen Vogue and the author of a new book called The Myth of Making It, A Workplace Reckoning. The book goes deep on what Samhita calls the having it all industrial complex, the harmful and misleading myths sold to women, sold to everyone really, about what it means to be ambitious, starting decades ago with Helen Gurley Brown, the iconic editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan, who made the phrase famous, and ending, maybe, with girl boss hustle culture, and taking us through the workplace reckoning, she says in the title, that we're still living in now that kind of started with the pandemic. And Samhita had her own reckoning in the pandemic that we'll definitely want to talk about. So Samhita, welcome to Money Talks.
It's so good to be here.
So the book is this really deep story about women. These myths were sold about ambition, what it means to succeed, but it's also your personal journey. So I think I want to start there. You're known for being executive editor of Teen Vogue, a big accomplished job. But in the book, you say you took the job as kind of like a rebound relationship.
Well, a little bit. I mean, working in media, it's hard to always identify what's, a real and exciting opportunity and what's kind of just, it's sometimes hard to recover because the nature of these jobs moves so quickly, right? And I think that I had never really thought that I would end up in a role like that, let alone be faced with the possibility of interviewing with Anna Wintour or even be considered for a role like that. I was a blogger. I was a self-made writer who got a job at a startup, and it was, an exciting opportunity, but it also felt like my one shot. And so when I lost it, I was just devastated by that. And I write about that quite a bit in the book. And, and I know there's this long history of fail in the business world where it's failing is a part of accomplishing. And I'm that's great if you're a white man. But for me, it felt like that was my one shot. And then I lost it. And so what was going to happen after that? I was fine. I got another job. I got a great job, but I definitely was at that point a little bit jaded about the stability of the industry and what ultimately this job would mean for me.
So looking at it from the outside, it seems like you definitely made it. You turned, the bad situation of the layoff into something amazing. These are the seeds for a lot of business books. You could have written a book that was here's how to turn, I'm so sorry, lemons into lemonade or something. You know what I mean? How I did it or, one of those things, but you didn't do that. So, what was it like inside that success for you?
Yeah. And as I write about in the book, I had access to and became part of media and kind of upper echelon of New York society that was really exciting to be a part of, right? It's I'm sitting front row at New York Fashion Week. I'm in meetings with all kinds of high level people. I'm meeting incredible editors. I'm getting to work with these amazing journalists. On paper, it was that is literally the definition of making it. That is living a dream, someone's dream. Underneath it, I, at that point, had just been so burned out and I had been working so hard without a real sense of what success was supposed to look like for me. And so even when I'm sitting front row at New York Fashion Week, there's something inside of me that's you're really not supposed to be here. This is kind of weird. What are you even doing here? Why are you dressing up? Why are you putting all this makeup on? Do you look like a clown? I was questioning myself so much. And a lot of times I'd feel alienated or I'd be wow, I'm an outsider trying to be part of this group that's rooted in a type of insiderism and elitism that I'm just fundamentally not a part of. And that was kind of happening at the same time that I think as we're seeing this kind of growing agitation with the workforce, right? Where my team was getting increasingly frustrated. They were, not happy with what was going on in the workplace. And I didn't have like a ton of power to exact change over that. So I was kind of juggling both of these scenarios where it's like, oh, I'm like being held up as this leader and this person who's ostensibly in a position of power, but I don't actually have a lot of power. And there's not a lot of wiggle room for me to make this a better experience for the people that are working for me. And I think toggling between that, it's like I would look back at that time and I think that there was like some really exciting stuff. And I felt deeply invested and that I was like aligned in my purpose. But my body was telling another story. I was struggling with depression. I was struggling with consumption issues. I was tired. I was like, my body was bloated. And part of that is like how we believe the success is supposed to look like. Like I was eating out all the time. I was taking Ubers. I wasn't, having time with my friends, as much time with my friends as I'd like, and things like that I were coming to the forefront and making me realize. And honestly, like I didn't even realize I was pushing through all of it until the pandemic hit. And then I had this moment to step back and be like, is this even making me happy? Is this even what I want to be doing? I think a lot of women and a lot of people in general were like, what am I actually doing with my life? Like, is this relevant? Is this important? And that's not to say I don't think that what I was doing was important or impactful. It just forced me to realize that I was not really actually happy.
And you quit.
So I quit. It took some time, but yes.
Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cashback earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you cannot find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/slate. That's linkedin.com/slate to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's talk about a little and rewind a little to the beginning, to Helen Gurley Brown. Why did you decide to start there, do you think?
I really wanted to think about what predated kind of lean in and girl boss feminism. And I was really fascinated by what I see as this divide between kind of what feminists have long said about the workplace, which I think we can all objectively agree with, and what kind of organizers have said about the workplace, and then the advice that I think women get about the workplace in terms of just business advice that was geared towards women. And I really wanted to look at that divide and say, feminists were kind of saying this one thing, and it was very much about, college educated women getting back into the workforce. Whereas someone like Helen Gurley Brown, who for all intents and purposes is certainly not some kind of like Marxist labor organizer, but, she was, she was speaking to a woman that a lot of the feminists of the time were kind of missing, right? The, maybe not necessarily college educated, pink collar workers, secretarial workers, nurses, teachers, like women, young women that were kind of navigating careers and this new burgeoning kind of reality for young women where they were getting jobs instead of just getting married immediately. And I just thought that was really fascinating and a different, interesting take on how we've historically understood a lot of this advice. And so I was like, who was this woman? Like, what was her deal? Why did she write this book about having it all? And when you read the book, it's like, she doesn't even have children. She actually doesn't like motherhood. Like she has a weirdly ambivalent / almost hostile relationship. I think in one interview, she says, it makes you fat. Like she's really not trying to be a parent at all. And it's interesting that that message transformed into what it is today, which is about, being able to care for your family and also be ambitious in your career, where that's not even what she was talking about. And so I kind of wanted to start with where the myths originated. And go before like the lean in and the girl boss, which I think there's been so much written about, but actually really think about like what were the narratives that were being peddled to our mother's generation, like in the 70s and 80s, and what were they being force fed in terms of how they should be embarking on their careers.
What was her like baseline advice to women back then? Was it like, you can be really hot and also have a job? Like, was that kind of like the bottom line? And here's like a diet recipe for you that probably involves cottage cheese or something?
100% involves cottage cheese. You know, there's got to be some cottage cheese in there in the 80s.
Oh,
like,
yes.
So there's got to be a hard-boiled egg, some type of like tuna fish without mayonnaise, and like cottage cheese.
Oh.
That's like literally associate that with the 80s. So yeah, 100%. There's recipes in there. There's anti-aging advice, and there's also advice on your sexuality. Like she really prided herself on being a fellatio queen, and the importance of knowing how to knowing how to pleasure your man, and also to be as ruthlessly ambitious as you want in your career and getting ahead in your career. And, advice on how not to intimidate the men around you, to disarm them, but with your sexuality, which is, we know, ridiculous advice. But I think it was kind of interesting and groundbreaking at the time. I mean, it is a little bit like Joan versus Peggy from Mad Men, right? Where it's like, she was kind of playing by the rules she was coloring within the lines that were drawn for her, right? And that was the advice that she was kind of peddling. And I do think that did start that idea of like, you can internalize and personally overcome all of the structural barriers that you experience in the workplace, which has then been repeated ad nauseum in the decades since, right? I mean, that is fundamentally lean in, is basically saying like, we know that there's all these problems, but here's what you can personally do. And I will say I struggled with that a lot. I mean, obviously, like I wrote a book that's kind of a business book, and everybody's like, what's your advice, right? And it's like, well, it's complicated, right? Because part of the problem is that we've told women that if you, ask for more money and hustle your way to the top and like organize your life and, all of these kind of ideas around how to maximize your productivity and be able to parent and, have the right Tupperware, like all of these different products that are sold for around our productivity, that we ourselves are responsible for overcoming every hurdle that we face. And that's fundamentally not true.
Yeah, it's not true.
And there's new research actually that confirms this, that just came out last week, that's not getting a ton of traction, but actually the same woman that invented the term the glass cliff, which I don't know if you've heard of that, of like when women are put into leadership positions when a company is failing. So they have a new study out that basically found that messages like lean in, or what they call neoliberal feminism, which is also what I call it in my book, basically it pushes women to internalize the idea that they alone can overcome all of the obstacles that they experience in the workplace. And it makes them less likely to organize and agitate for change as a class of people. And this is the first research that's actually made that connection, that, because we can all be like, something doesn't feel right about it, but like, what else are we supposed to do? Right. Or even like, I think so many times we know and criticize advice like lean in, but in our own lives, we kind of do it, right? Like we're still like, I'm going to do the best I can. I'm trying to get a seat at the table. Like, it's kind of, I keep saying it's like diet culture. It's like, we all know it's bad, but then in our heads, we're like, on Monday, I'll eat healthy again. It's like, we still do it, even when we know it's not right. And I feel like this is the first piece of evidence that suggests that it's actually a much closer relationship, that it is telling yourself that you can do it through hard work and perseverance, and you could overcome any obstacle, is actually leads to disincentivizing you organizing more collectively.
Yeah, that lines up with all of like management's arguments against unionizing, right? Like you can succeed working hard. A union will just bring you down because not everyone's gonna be working as hard as you are. So that's no good. Like you can do that on your own. I feel like all of that's coming to a head with you in a position as a middle manager. And you have so much great stuff in the book about like the reality of being a middle manager, because you come in and you, like you said, they tell you you're a leader, you're a groundbreaking leader who's going to do amazing things. You're a woman of color and you're going to champion all the other women of color, make it easier for them in the workplace. But like you're the middle manager, you're the cog in the wheel, you're taking orders from above and like having to implement them below and like justify the actions of management you might not even agree with. And I think you're right. It sort of that makes you sick. That's very stressful. I don't know what to take away from that, because I would want someone like you in that position because you want good managers doing the good managing, and you want people who understand and have empathy for the people working under them. But at the same time, it just seems like an untenable role if you are actually empathetic to the people working for you.
Yeah. That was some of the hardest stuff to write in the book was those personal experiences, because I realized that I'm writing from a different vantage point. I think that a lot of work around labor is, obviously and rightfully dealing with lower wage workers or the working class or people that are at the bottom rung of a corporate environment. And that was not me, right? I had more power than that. I made more money than the people that worked for me. And that comes with it a set of privilege. I had authority in certain ways, but in other ways I didn't. And in many ways, you're an enforcer when you're middle management. So whatever the directive is, I'm not the person sitting at the table determining the broader strategy for something. I just have to make sure that my team executes on it. And, I think that depending on the environment that you're in, this was particularly egregious, and I'm sure you can relate to this, in media, where strategic decisions are made willy-nilly, and often they don't make any sense. And what they come at the cost of your most precious resource, which is your workers, right? And that's something that we've seen across digital media for sure the last couple of years, the absolute denigration of our talent and our ability to have any type of reliable work whatsoever. So just not holding back here. but so I think it was particularly exaggerated in the environment that I was working in, but that wasn't the only environment I've experienced it. I've been a middle manager in consulting and in other kinds of work. So, and in organizing work. So there has been a history of dividing that band from the worker, right? I think that the great Barbara Ehrenreich called it the professional managerial class. And, there's a lot of contention, especially in leftist circles, about whether the PMC is a site of radicalization, there's an opportunity there, or if they're just part of the master class, or, they're part of the oppressor. And I think that what I was learning was, and what we're starting to see is that band of people are actually coming into some kind of consciousness. It's really white collar workers that are in management roles that are kind of what the hell am I doing? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to make my team do this? And this is not even why I got into this work. And what's interesting is how it works. It's the higher you get in a org structure, the further you get away from the thing that you were hired to do, right? Which is why there are so many bad leaders, because there were people that might have been good at the thing that they were hired to do. And then they were just pushed and pushed and pushed, because it's where else are you going to go? And the question that I kept asking myself was what would it look like to approach management just in a totally different way philosophically? And there are a lot of people that are doing this incredible work around leadership, right? Adam Grant, writers like Adam Grant, I think Brene Brown, and people that are really talking about what does courageous leadership look like? And while I love that theoretically, in the day-to-day, it's really hard to implement that, right? Because you're still responsible for either a bottom line or a deliverable or some type of product that needs to be produced. And you are dealing with an increasingly frustrated generation of people that aren't trying to work endlessly the way that we did or the way that we were expected to. And how do you kind of take that energy and actually create a collective environment from that? And what does that look like? And it was everything from how you give feedback to the fact that when I am advocating for a raise for an employee, I will always ask for the most possible money, because it is not my money. Why do I care, right? Just these weird things that we learn as middle managers, where you're well, they have to earn it. And it's what does earning even mean? Just make sure your team feels like they're included. Make sure they feel that they're empowered in their positions, that they're having impact. And I always say it's not my job to make you happy. That's the therapist. I can't, I'm still trying to figure out how to be happy, but I can make sure that you are utilizing your skills to the best ability, that the work you're doing is beneficial to the group and is impact driven. And those are the things that I can kind of help you with. And so I don't know, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but that's really where I was what would it look like for us as managers to take the job totally differently, and as managers be judged based on our ability to create that collective environment, right? Where part of the job is not just getting ahead in my own ambitions, but that my ambition is actually connected to the ambitions of these other people.
Let's take a break here. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about another industrial complex, a real hot button issue lately, which is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
The IKEA Business Network is now open for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Join for free today to get access to interior design services to help you make the most of your workspace, employee well-being benefits to help you and your people grow, and amazing discounts on travel, insurance, and IKEA purchases, deliveries, and more. Take your small business to the next level when you sign up for the IKEA Business Network for free today by searching IKEA Business Network.
Owning a business isn't just an occupation, it's a legacy for those you want to pass it on to. At Sandy Spring Trust, succession planning is one of the many aspects of wealth services we provide. We'll work with you one-on-one to answer questions and advise you on valuations, transfer of ownership, and much more. What's your next financial destination? Visit sandyspringbank.com/wealth. Wealth and insurance products are not FDIC insured, not guaranteed, and may lose value. Wealth products offered by Sandy Spring Trust, a division of Sandy Spring Bank.
In 1978, gay people in California faced a dire threat.
Proposition 6, the Briggs Initiative.
The teaching profession is riddled with the homosexual element.
John Briggs is going to fire every gay and lesbian school teacher in the state of California.
I'm Christina Cauterucci. This season on Slow Burn, we'll explore how a nationwide backlash against gays and lesbians led to a massive showdown in California.
This was tens of thousands of pissed off gay guys and lesbians roaring down Market Street.
With so much at stake, young people became activists.
We've got to fight back. We can't let this happen in California.
And activists became leaders.
My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you.
Slow Burn, Season 9, Gays Against Briggs. Listen to the whole season now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay. You do have a chapter in the book, and I think it is called The Diversity Industrial Complex.
It sure is.
Speaking of industrial complexes, what is that?
I thought about it as all of the different kind of courses, programs, teaching, cottage industry, book of interest that kind of came together, that coalesced in the last, I would say 20 years, but most concentrated in the last 5 to 6 years around how to diversify the workplace and the kind of ongoing discussions that are happening around it. And I do think like these organizations that have cropped up that are committing themselves to diversity and inclusion, and all of the hires that were made and all of the kind of trainings that went into place in an effort to disrupt or to really have a Band-Aid for the ways that racism in particular functions in most workplaces.
So you'll often see, and I see this all the time, there will be all these reports that say, this new report finds diversity increases profits by X amount. Diversity drives revenue. Diversity is, they all basically say diversity is really good for business. McKinsey has endless reports. But in the book, you say, actually, it might not be good for business, but it's still good.
Right. Well, the leading research now is not necessarily that diversity in and of itself is good for business. It's when you actually have inclusive perspectives in every part of the business. So the researchers that were looking into this question were basically interrogating the idea that in order to get business leaders to care about diversity, we have to tell them that there's a profit value to it, right? And so diversity in and of itself can't just be an inherent good, which we know as a society, it is. It's inherently good. A more inclusive, more just, more humane society is better for all of us. That's something I would like to think we can all agree on. But in the business space, the only way historically to make the case for having more diversity, especially at the leadership level, was to try and make the case for business. And what these researchers found was, while it's true that there is a good case for why diversity is good for your business, they can't actually find a linear line between diversity and profit. And the reason for that is often when you have a more diverse environment, you may not necessarily account for the fact that there are experiences that people are having where they're not able to fully integrate themselves within a environment. So if you're, say your creative team, wants diversity, and you go out and you hire, a diverse, quote, diverse candidate, whatever that means, what are you doing within the company to ensure that that person feels empowered to contribute in a real way, feels any kind of leadership or ownership over the product, and is ultimately feeling like they are a part of the bigger organization. And what they found instead was that often diversity and inclusion education and training, if anything, had the opposite effect, and rather than bring people together, highlighted their differences and made people feel a little bit more either self-conscious about them or brought them to the forefront, and which perpetuated ideas of people of color feeling like they were diversity hires, because then you're kind of like, oh, well, you're saying diversity is good for business. You're hiring me because it's good for business. But like, what about me as a person? Like, what am I actually contributing to this workplace? And what they ultimately conclude is that diversity is good for your workplace. That's a different set of assumptions than saying that diversity is good for your bottom line, which is a different justification and shouldn't be something that's used necessarily, right? Because that is inherently just makes people of color feel like, well, I'm only here because like you think that it's going to be good for your bottom line, but like that's not how a white person is hired, right? That's only something you take into consideration when you hire a person of color.
I mean, we saw DEI explode in 2020 after George Floyd's murder, but now we're seeing just like an excruciating backlash against it. And a lot of companies sort of retrenching from that position that a lot of people criticize, and it was worth criticizing back then, of, you know, posting black squares, making a lot of these diversity hires in just the way you're describing, in a way that wasn't inclusive, didn't make anyone feel included, all of that. But at the same time, what's happening now, this backlash, it doesn't seem like a great thing that's happening. Like, even if DEI isn't effective, it seems like the backlash is not the way to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. It's part of what made DEI and DNI education and training ineffective was what happened in 2020 and 2021 was this kind of really superficial, like, we need to deal with this issue, right? Rather than look at like the deeper structural issues of how, you know, percentage wise, the way that women of color are treated when they advance throughout their careers, the way that they're left out of the boardroom, the way that, you know, the wage gap has continued in egregious ways throughout literally any industry you could name. I mean, part of what was so interesting about this research was one of the researchers I talked to, Victor Ray, when I asked him, you know, what is the proof that, like, you know, like, can we say that diversity at the top will actually fundamentally change the way that inequality works in the workplace? And he was like, we have so little evidence of that. We have no way of proving it. There's so few diverse leaders that like, we don't even actually know what would happen. Right. And so exactly what you're saying is right. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that, you know, these strategies and policies were a drop in the bucket compared to the ways that racism is entrenched and encoded in the workplace, right? From everything, from how we hire to who has access to those jobs, to the types of education, to the types of backgrounds, to like, if your families both went to France in the summer, right? Like, it's like every part of it. And that it's not just race, it's gender, it's class, it's all of these different ways that culturally people are kept out of the workplace or kept out from actually being promoted and treated equitably in the workplace. And so, yeah, a lot of the hires that were made were symbolic. And now you have this like free for all of like, I shouldn't laugh about it, but you have like an entire segment of people that have been laid off, right? Like everyone's closing their DEI. It's like a joke right now. Everyone's closing their department and they're like, oh, we didn't need it anyway. It wasn't effective. And it's like, well, the way that we're doing it is not effective. That's true. And I wouldn't say that it's absolutely not effective either. I think it's really important that people were asking these really difficult questions about what does it look like to like, what is workplace bias? What is unconscious bias? How do I reproduce it when I go to hire? Why is it that certain people I vibe with and certain people I don't? What are the cultural expectations around that? And so I think that it is a problem, that it's not even just that there's been a backlash against it. I mean, there's been a right-wing backlash against it. But I also think on the left, we are frustrated about it as well. And because it hasn't led to the liberation or the integration or the equality that we think had hoped it would. And so it's largely been seen as a corporate strategy that's kind of just to help the company look good, not actually change anything materially for the people that work for it.
I mean, it's really another piece to the whole thing you're writing about, which is like DEI is kind of like the individual solution to the structural problem. Like companies with chief DEI officers were never going to solve like structural racism in the United States and all the reasons why, you know, people who aren't white feel like they don't belong in certain spaces and face, you know, bigger challenges in those spaces. It's more of that, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay. I wanted to take it back to you. What are you doing now? You left Vogue. You feel healthier.
I wish. The hustle never ends. Yeah, no, I left Teen Vogue, and I've been writing this book for the last 3 years. I am currently on leave, but I've been working part-time as an editorial director for a feminist media company called The Meteor. And I think that the bigger question in my own life around what success looks like and will it be enough is ongoing, especially as I'm standing on the precipice of launching a book. And I'm like, will I be happy if this book just makes a minor splash, not a major one, right? And tempering my expectations around that. And I had this moment, the other day where I was just like, I need to just like take a breath and like really enjoy what's happening right now and be grateful for all the things that are going to happen, rather than feeling like I need to do everything that's possibly possible to make this as successful as possible. And so as much as I am like, I wrote this book, processed a lot of these feelings myself as I was writing the book, I still struggle with a lot of these myths myself in terms of, and also rubbing against the reality of like, when you're a freelancer or when you're trying to make your career or make a name for yourself, there are just certain things you have to do to make that happen. But I definitely am not looking for another big job. I'm not interested in that. And I am very much focused on creating and working with and being in community with other people that are asking this bigger question. And I feel like that's been the big shift is I'm not working in isolation anymore. I know a lot of other people that are grappling with the same question I'm grappling with. And if there's one thing I hope people get out of this book, it's that they're not alone in this journey and that we alone cannot solve for this quagmire of a situation that we've been put in. And we have to stop pushing ourselves to try and solve it.
And what would you tell someone, some young woman just starting out right now who looks to you and says, wow, I want to make it like her. I want to publish a book. I want to rise to the top. I want to interview with Anna Wintour, whatever it is. What would you say to them?
Do you?
Really?
It's like when people are like, what advice do you have for going into journalism? Run. No. My advice for young women that are embarking upon their career is to just have an honest personal reckoning of what it is that you actually want to do and where do you think you'll be the most impactful in doing it. And it may not necessarily be the big job. It may not be the most money. It may be something much more humble or more in alignment with the life that you actually want to live. And I think that's a hard thing to know also. Like you don't have to, like it's okay to make mistakes. One thing that I really learned throughout my career that I tried to, really share in the book is I've had every different kind of job you could imagine. Like by the time I got to Teen Vogue, I had really only worked in media for 6 or 7 years. Prior to that, I had been working in so many other industries. And all of those mistakes allowed me to learn what I was good at and give me new insight into what I wanted to do next. And I just think there's so much pressure to try and figure all that out when you're so young now. And it's impossible. Like it's literally impossible. And And so I think my advice is to just really be like, what is the thing I need to do? And does it have to be this job? Does it have to come through the thing that's paying my bills? Or can I figure that out later and put a little less pressure on ourselves to figure it all out?
You were one of, many who rethought their work life during COVID, who, ratcheted back, quit jobs, restructured, all of it. Do you think that's a lasting trend, or will we see sort of Girl Boss 3.0 or something new, a revival of ambition? Are we already seeing it?
I don't think women's ambition is going anywhere. I think that we have the opportunity right now to not have a Girl Boss Part 3, right? And to really think about what it looks like for us to connect across our differences and really work to create work environments that are actually equitable and address the realities of our lives, especially as women and especially as mothers. And I just think people are fed up in a way that I've never seen them fed up before. I think what's not changing is workplaces that will continue to try and demand the most from us while giving us the least. I do not see that changing, but I do think that our frustration with it and our agitation of that is what is the next phase of Girl Boss should look like, is what would actually a collective where we said together as women, we are not going to do this anymore.
Samhita, thank you so much.
Thank you.